Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. So in this video, I'm going to debate whether the United States should withdraw from Afghanistan. And first of all, I shall be the proposition. Right, so I'm so much into my gender equality that I usually assume that the chair is female. So in the egalitarian spirit, I shall commence that way. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the motion before the House is that this House believes that the United States should pull out of Afghanistan. Well, I'm going to outline why it ought to do so. The United States has succeeded as far as it ever will in Afghanistan, which is not very far, because it's the only route to peace is American withdrawal, because outright victory is just not possible in a country where war is very much the norm and not the exception. Because the presence of American troops simply acts as an irritant to the conflict, and in the long run, this will save both money and lives. So let's come back to the beginning. If the United States was absolutely committed, if it brought back the draft and sent every soldier it had, Marine it had, and so on, then yeah, it would have been over a long time ago. But the United States has got into a habit since 9/11 of fighting semi-wars. Maybe not even a half war, a quarter war, of not really trying, of spreading itself too thin, its imperial overstretch. So enough to aggravate the situation, but not actually resolve it. If they said, we're absolutely committed, we're going to throw everything we had at this, it would have been over a very long time ago. But the American public is not willing to do it. There's no stomach for this fight, nor is Congress up for it. People are not willing to lose votes over this, say we're going to have to pay more in tax or do whatever it is to win the war. You look at the First World War, the Second World War, let's say back to the American Civil War, where the United States said, we will pay the blood price, we'll do whatever it takes, we will suffer for several years, but we will win in the end. No, in this time, they're not willing to suffer. Super rich people like Donald Trump, they're not willing to pay an extra cent in taxation. They have these blue-collar boys, and indeed girls, volunteering for the military. They can go off and get killed, but the super rich, they're oh so patriotic, but they're not going to stump up an extra penny in tax. I mean, they could donate voluntarily if they really wanted to. So it's doing more harm than good to have enough soldiers there to make the situation worse, but not make it better. There have been some success. The Taliban were driven out of sub-provinces. They mostly snuck back. The Afghan government had a chance to get going, had some democratic norms going. You know, the economy developed, women had got their rights back, things like that. That was progress. Unfortunately, a lot of that has been frittered away because the NATO troops were not committed to the fight, were not willing to sustain a serious number of fatalities. And of course, the United States and other NATO armies have committed war crimes there. I'm not suggesting that the Taliban have not, but this is all very well documented by WikiLeaks, by the US military itself. You can see the war diaries about this. So the Taliban are parleying with the Afghan government, the United States and others, and indeed Russia has facilitated some of these negotiations, and that's the only way to achieve peace, to involve all interested parties, including the government of Pakistan, India, perhaps some of the Central Asian countries, Iran. I think it was Macmillan who said, jaw is better than war. So it doesn't appear like there is a military solution, especially as neither side's getting the upper hand, and the United States doesn't have the resolve to see it through. If the political will was there, well, the technology and the manpower is certainly there, but as the will is lacking, then it has to be by negotiation. And the Afghans, they want a peaceful solution, rather than outright victory. The trouble about these irregular conflicts is they rarely come to a definitive end where one side is decisively defeated and signs an instrument of surrender. They peter out. The level of violence gets a bit lower and a bit lower and a bit lower, and it just bubbles away slightly. May flare up decades later. So another thing is the Taliban will not be bested without Pakistan being on side. Remember, the Taliban are mostly of the Pathan ethnicity, Pashto-speaking people from the south and east of the country, as in bordering the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And so they are the same ethnicity and the same language group as the Pathans, who are there in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or Pakhtunkhwa, I think I should say, and indeed in Baluchistan. So Pakistan is often very sympathetic to the Taliban because of links of blood and language, often familial links, and this is a region in which family is everything. They're the cousins, often literally the cousins between the two. The Durand line, that's the frontier between the two countries, is largely imaginary. It's a very porous border. Anyway, the ISI, that's Inter-Services Intelligence, Pakistan Secret Service, helped to create the Taliban for various reasons, partly ideological agreement, but there's a way to control Afghanistan, to push out the government, which had been obviously pro-Soviet and after that pro-Indian, to have Afghanistan as little more than a satrapy of Islamabad. So the ISA and the army in Pakistan don't necessarily get on, and they didn't want to see the Americans succeed too easily. Then they might attack Pakistan, then Afghanistan might be an American ally, or God forbid, an Indian ally. So unless the United States was willing to attack Pakistan, the Taliban was not going to be defeated, because they had a safe haven, they had money, arms, training, funding, and so on. Many Pakistanis were against this. I know they committed atrocities in Pakistan, so it depends who they were killing. But there was at least a significant minority in Pakistan who was on their side. And often these are the minority with access to weapons and so on. I'm not saying the ISA completely moved as a unit. There was some disagreement there. Cooperating with the United States as much as they could to get away with it. One American CIA officer said that Pakistan played the Bush administration like a fiddle, giving them just enough to mollify the Americans. They conciliate them by arresting a non-Pakistani Taliban and handing him over every so often. Anyway, so there's been conflict in Afghanistan for decades between the different ethnic groups. The Shia minority has been taking it in the neck for a long time. Likewise, the tiny Hindu and Sikh minorities. So it's been in the graveyard of empires, as in the Soviet Empire, the British Empire. Even Alexander the Great had a rough ride there. Some people genuinely like fighting. It's just the norm there. And it's all been funded by heroin. One of the ways in which it's been such a disaster, such a staggering failure in its own terms, is its ignominious failure to stop the heroin trade. And that's where the Taliban gets almost all its money from. If you're a poor farmer and you could be making whatever it is, $300 a year from crops, but you can make $3,000 a year from heroin, well, I mean, it's a no-brainer. There are not many people who are moral enough to say, no, I won't do it because it harm people in rich countries. No, we can kill the infidel either with our bullets or with our dope, so we don't really mind. So if that was actually simply legalized, the bottom would fall out of the market and the Taliban would lose most of their money. And as people aren't willing to follow the logic of this, it's not going to happen. Destroying the crop, paying them not to grow it, has met with only very limited success. So American troops are a target. They're an irritant. Of course, some of them are intelligent, very honorable, treat local people decently, others very much not so. And that aggravates things. And of course, it's the few negative incidents. These are seized upon and skillfully exploited by Taliban propagandists who are aided and abetted by their sympathies in the West, not just Islamists, but often far leftists. So the US troops should defend the United States, and some people don't realize what defense is about. It's about your own territory, not somebody else's. So America's expended enough blood and treasure there and should get back. Finally, Trump should honor a campaign pledge. All right, so now I'm going to be the opposition. This is me. So, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm opposed to this resolution for many reasons. It would bring about victory for the Taliban. It would allow the Taliban and its kindred organizations to oust other governments in the region, because it would be a betrayal of the victims of 9/11. And it would enormously enfeeble the United States' position in that region and elsewhere. Emboldening America's foes is a relatively small cost to victory. Well, let me go over the reasons. Well, the Taliban is perhaps the cruelest movement on earth. They banned music. Think about that. I can't think of any other tyrant, no matter how horrifically oppressive, who outlawed music. Whether it's Kim Jong-un, whether it's Adolf Hitler, anyone like that, nobody else banned music. They were so oppressive. A woman was not allowed to show her face. This is not like Saudi Arabia, where women are allowed to show their faces. Saudi Arabia has television, has women on television, things like that. The Taliban didn't allow any of that. So it's not true to say that even the Wahhabis, even the ultra-conservatives in Saudi Arabia, are as bad as the Taliban. And the Taliban will take over. It's a certainty that they will. If NATO is not there to bolster their Afghan allies, the people of Afghanistan are going to be betrayed by their mighty ally, and it's ignominious. The Taliban will then not only take over this country, they'll be able to infiltrate, say, Central Asia and overthrow some of the governments there, who are obviously deeply anxious about this. And in Pakistan, likewise, it'll be a big fillip to the reactionary forces there, who've carried out numerous massacres in Pakistan. It was letting down America's allies. The people of Afghanistan, they trusted the United States and other NATO countries, and now they're being thrown to the wolves. So it's deeply shameful. Remember 9/11. This was a recruiting ground. This was a training base for Al-Qaeda. The Taliban hosted them. Largely the same ideological outlook. And there will be more attacks. You tell them that they're going to win, that Western countries have no willpower, will throw in the towel at the first hurdle. Fewer than 3,000 American troops were killed in Afghanistan over, my goodness, some 17 years. The United States with over 320 million people. Well, I'm afraid to say this is actually a tiny, tiny casualty figure. I know that's very hard to take for the families who've been bereaved, but think about it dispassionately for a moment. This is proportionately a lower fatality rate than America sustained in almost any other conflict. I'm not a hard man by any means. I've never been a soldier, never wish to, all right? But examine this objectively. It is not a high death toll to pay. This is a conflict that the United States can easily win if it remained committed, if it sent the troops, if it hadn't gone into Iraq and elsewhere. Now, obviously, Russia is hosting talks on Afghanistan. You may know the Soviet army was there from 1979 to 89. It will enhance Russian influence in the region, which you might say is a good thing. But despite the Kremlin applauding Trump and his move, actually the Russians are a little bit worried because they feel the problem has been handed to them, a whole can of worms. And then the Taliban, as I say, will be attacking Russia's sphere of influence, the former Soviet republics, which border Afghanistan to the north, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and what's the other one? Turkmenistan, and on and on. So it will be a huge fillip to America's nemesis around the globe. They will have their morale boosted by this shameful retreat by President Trump. And he's not even properly retreating. He's still going to leave 7,000 troops there. So make your mind up. You're withdrawing or not. So there's just still there to be a few sitting ducks. So there's a relatively small financial cost. But because it's not paying political dividends in the short term, he's not willing to do it. A troop surge, so to say, go all out there, annihilate them, I don't really care what the casualty figures are, then it might have been achievable. As I say, follow through the logic of it. Say, all right, heroin is legalized. I know it's very harmful. I hope no one would ever take it. But that is where the Taliban get 90% of their funding. If it was legalized, suddenly they'd be stuck for funding. There's nothing else that they can get money from so easily. Not kidnapping people, not robberies. They can get some money from that, but it'd be an awful lot more difficult. And that's that. And then pressurizing the Pakistanis to saying, you actually play ball with us or there'll be hell to pay. And the Bush administration actually did consider this. And I'm afraid to say that the Trump administration has forgotten all the lessons of the Soviet presence in Afghanistan in the 80s, that Pakistan is key to all this. Obviously, Pakistan had a superpower on its side, the United States at the time, so the Soviets couldn't strong-arm Pakistan too much. The Pakistanis don't have a superpower on their side anymore. Indeed, they got one which is their enemy, India, which is on their border, and say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll bring Indian troops in here. How would you like that? Now, I know Pakistan's got nuclear weapons, so it can't be pushed around too easily. Victory was here for the taking. If only America was willing to commit, and all the NATO allies were there. Turkey was there, another Muslim country, Romania, Canada, France, Germany, the United Kingdom. Many of these countries didn't send troops to Iraq, but they did to Afghanistan. Remember, after 9/11, the United States invoked that article of NATO's charter saying, there's attack on one, there's attack on all, you must all come to our aid. And all the other NATO countries, they answered that call. And now they're being told, well, mission was a failure, we don't care, we're pulling out. What did their troops die for? 9/11 wasn't an attack on France or Germany or Romania or many of the others I could name, all the 40-odd NATO countries. So there we are. It will be an absolute cataclysm to pull out, and if you think this is the end of the conflict, you've got another thing coming. It may well lead to an awful lot more attacks on the United States and elsewhere. So it's a sad, sad day for those who care about liberty when this viciously cruel, medieval and evil system is allowed to win. it could yet be stopped.